We're asking a little bit about the Big Bang. What pshat is in the Big Bang, and whether this is in the Torah. So we spoke about the fact that dinosaurs lichura mentioned explicitly in the Torah, hataninim hagdolim, which of course Chazal do a lot with, explaining that that's a Leviathan, and but that's al derech remez and al derech drush, which are also exceedingly important. But it seems to be, I mean, there is pshat in the psukim. There's pshat in the psukim. There's a simple read of the psukim that also needs to be true and relevant. Figuring out exactly what that pshat is not always super simple, and sometimes it takes a long time for us to try to figure out what the pshat in a pasuk is. Sometimes, and this is a machlokas between the mefarshei pshat, in the days of Chazal, we mentioned this once or twice before. It doesn't seem to be that like people were so hung up on what the pshat of the pasuk is. It seemed to be that they understood what the pshat of the pasuk was. Like there wasn't something that bothered them extensively. It was just like the pasuk, and there might have been multiple reads in the pasuk and multiple reads that were all accurate. That's also true, right? You could have a multiplicity of meanings within the same text, and it all be pshat. That's for sure true. We do this all the time in the way that we speak. We speak with multiple layers of meaning in the simple meaning of the things that we're saying. And then there's like all the different levels of like, you know, the cognitive pieces of it and the psychological pieces of it, the spiritual pieces of it and the emotional pieces. I mean, all of the pieces of it, like those are different levels. But there are simple levels of what the pshat of a pasuk is that like, there might be multiplicities of interpretations of within the pshat and all of them being accurate. And there's nothing wrong with that. The way that at least some of the Mefarshei Pshat understand Pshuta Shel Mikra to be is what the Torah meant to the first people that heard it, which is normatively assumed to be who the first people that heard it? Right, the Jews in the Midbar. Which is probably true, at least for the part of the Torah from Matan Torah onwards. There's an interesting question that the Medrash suggests. That they might well have had proto-versions of Bereshis through the end of, maybe the beginning of Shmos. And this is the Medrash Tanchum, if I'm not mistaken, that where Paras says, you know, that they should go off back to their suffering, back to their backbreaking labor. Val yishashu b'divrei shaker, and they shouldn't like mess around with these words of lies. So the Medrash Tanchuma says, well, what were these like things that the Jewish people were doing instead of working? So the Tanchuma says that they had ksavim, they had like folktales of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, folktales meaning proto-Bereshis. They knew those stories. And they had them written down. And they would read these things to their children to inspire them with hope. That doesn't matter.
Oh, before Matan Torah.
Yeah, long before Matan Torah.
Okay. Doesn't seem far-fetched.
Not far-fetched at all. It's not frum to say that. Right? Meaning it's not frum to say that there was like a text of the Torah before. Right?
It's very, but it seems very likely that
right?
It wasn't given over as a text of the Torah.
Correct. Correct. 100%.
This is what happened way back when.
These stories were not bizarre to them. They knew all of them, and the Medrash Tanchuma says that they had texts of it that they read to each other. That were they accurate? So by the time they got the Torah, they got like the final verdict of what's in and what's out, and what's included and what's not, and what the story is and isn't. But it makes a tremendous amount of sense to say that they had these things beforehand. Yeah. That they were keeping the Torah and mitzvahs for sure. That's for sure true. In some way, shape, manner, or form. What exactly we mean by the others keeping the Torah is a very, very lengthy discussion. It is the question comes up in a Rashi that people think is a pasuk. When Yaakov meets up with his brother Esav, finally in Parshas Vayishlach, after running away and then going to the house of Laban, being there for 2 and a bit decades, and then coming back, and then he meets with he's about to meet with Esav. He says, "Kosamru le'achile Esav im lavan garti ve tarig shema." You're right, but that's not what the pasuk says, right? Im lavan garti, I lived with Lavan ve'charad ata, and that's where I've been until now. But Rashi there says im lavan garti ve tarig mitzvah shamarti. I mean, the word garti, gimel reish taf yud, is the same gematria as Taryag, 613. The Yaakov is saying, I lived in the house of Lavan, but I observed all 613 mitzvahs, which is impossible. Why is it impossible?
Israel did exist, and there's mitzvahs about it.
So, for sure, he was not a Kohen, and he didn't execute anybody in the Beis Din, and he did not get divorced, and he didn't do Yibum or Chalitza, and he also wasn't a king.
Mitzvahs doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing every mitzvah.
Yeah, so that obviously, right?
Wouldn't break that mitzvah.
Well, so what that Rashi means. So what that Rashi means is an interesting question. What does that mean in Tarig Mitzvah Shamarti that I observed 630 mitzvahs? Obviously, he didn't observe 630 mitzvahs.
He did everything that he could, therefore it counts.
So that would have been Imlov and Garti, the Torah Shamarti, whatever. But the specific understanding of Tarig Mitzvah Shamarti means, and this you see this in all of the Svarim, is that Tarig Mitzvahs, like we've explained many times about everything in the world, have a bottom basement level of the actual activity of doing the mitzvah. And then there are multiple levels of what that mitzvah does for you and what that mitzvah makes you feel and how that transforms the way that you exist and live and practice in the world. Meaning that it's possible that Yaakovin is saying, I was holding on to all of the values of 613 mitzvahs, meaning that all of those things were inculcated into my being, though I was not able to practically practice all of those mitzvahs. Which to a certain extent is what we are obligated and relegated to today, right? Meaning what the Gemara tells us, anybody that learns that says over the parsha of the Ola as if they brought a Karban Ola. The Mabit in Beis Elakim has an interesting discussion, whether that's only true by Karbanos or it's true by all mitzvahs. That by learning it, it's as if you fulfilled it, or by learning it, it's as if you fulfilled it is only by Karbanos, because Hashem made that deal with Avraham Avinu at the end of Parshas Lech Lecha. So the Gemara at the end of Tanis. But if you learn all the other mitzvahs, you can gain the values of it, but it's not as if you fulfilled them. It's not as if you fulfilled them, and it seems to be that at least in Bavel, they paskin that it's only by Karbanos, that by learning it is as if you fulfilled it, which is why we have Gemaras on Kachim. But we don't have Gemaras on the Talmud Bavli has only brachas in Seder Zeraim and only nida in Seder Taras. Meaning, what about Peah and what about Tamai and what about Matzah Sheni and what about Truma? Right? None of that is there in Talmud Bavli. In Yerushalmi, you have Shkalim because that was relevant to them in Eretz Yisrael. That's why the Daf Yomi, there's only one Masech. Masech Shkalim is in Yerushalmi. It's not in Bavli. Because in Bavli it wasn't relevant. So they learned all of the relevant halachas, and then they learned the halachas of Kachim because it's as if you have fulfilled them. And the rest of the time they spent on learning the other, meaning they wrote down the Talmud Bavli. They spent their time on the meat and potatoes, the things that were halacha l'maisa and Kachim, because that's also halacha l'maisa. It's as if you fulfilled it. But you can still gain a wealth of perspective and knowledge, not l'maisa, but halacha v'loy l'maisa, right? Meaning you learn all of these things, it changes you. That's pshat. In Lavan Gati. What?
These are big matzos.
Yeah. So the Gemara says that the Machshava says that when the angels came, it was Erev Pesach, right?
So he also prepared Basar B'chala.
Right, which is also a question. Yeah, that's and all the.
But also, you said like nomadic people used to make matzah. Like,
Yes.
Yes. Because then you showed us that video.
Yeah. So
there were no takanas. There were no takanas then. There were no, the nuances that we have now.
yes,
The restriction.
Yeah.
This was straight Torah, so
So like,
things were different.
is it safe to say that they essentially did what is the precursors of what eventually became halacha in the Torah? They did it without even knowing that it would eventually be that. So it's more like when it was written in the Torah, when it became Torah Shabbat Peh, it almost became like a reflection of what the forefathers already did, and they did it appropriately, almost like the Ruach HaKodesh. that you were doing it correctly. Let's do it the way that they were doing it for whatever reasons.
So there's two sides to the coin here. And it happens to be an interesting question. This is a confusing, internally somewhat inconsistent mahalach within the Rambam. And people get upset about this. And we've mentioned this in different shiurim at different points in time, but it's kedai to understand. The Rambam writes in the Mishnah Torah that when Mashiach Tzidkenu comes by Hashem Yisbarach, you'll find this in the Rambam Hilchos Malachim Milcham Hashem. It's actually worth seeing this inside, because otherwise people don't believe me. Meaning you should, because at least believe the Rambam. The Rambam says when Mashiach Tzidkenu comes, this is in the 11th parak of Hilchos Malachim. He says, bless you, Makrivim Korbanos, we will bring Korbanos, and we will once again reinstitute the 7-year cycles of Shemitah and the 50-year cycles of Yovel, like all of the mitzvahs are written in the Torah. I mean, we're going to go back to bring Korbanos and Beis HaMikdash, and like what Rabbi Lachman likes to say, like, this is going to require some cultural re-education. Because
holds that it could be like meal offerings as opposed to.
That's not the Rambam. The Rambam says
other...
maybe we can talk about that in a second. That's a mahalach that Rav Kook has in the Alashriya. But Pshat in the Rambam, and Rav Kook deals with this question a lot, but at least in a few places. But Pshat in the Rambam is that we're going to go back to bring Karbanos, like what Rav Lachman said to us in Shir. Many times he would say to us, those that been in Shir by Rav Lachman have ever heard him talk about Korbanos and Beis HaMikdash. So he jokes. It's like, when you say that we should see the return of God to Jerusalem. Please, God, bring back the sacrifices. He's like, man, I don't know about you, but I'm not so excited to see skirted priests slitting throats of goats and listening to Oriental nasal music. Right? Like, that's what it's going to be. That's what we're going for. So it is going to require some.
Not to mention Peter.
Correct. That's It's going to require some serious cultural something.
There was a lot of sharing that went on.
Yes. That my dear friend.
Like a big, I'm saying, it's
but
not just
Like a brisket party.
like a brisket party. Look what brings the people together.
that's Pashtus is. It's going to require some re-education. We're not like. I'm saying people like coming to shul for Kiddush. I don't know if they'd be so excited to come to shul to like throw blood on altar. I'm saying, maybe. So it's going to require some re-education. But nevertheless, the Rambam says that this is what's going to happen when Mashiach Tzidkenu comes. And the Rambam also writes, this is in the Moreh Nevuchim, that the entire institution of Karbanos was to wean the people off of Avodah Zarah. And the Ramban in Sefer Vayikra gets very upset with the Rambam. And he stands in his head and screams at him from across a century and across the Mediterranean Sea. He says, "I don't understand what you're talking about. How could it be that you think that Korbanos have anything to do with Avodah Zarah?" Correct. Adam Arishan, the Gemara says, Chazal say broke Korbanos and Kain and Hevel broke Korbanos and Noach broke Korbanos.
Wasn't Avodah Zarah the worst after the first temple was built, though? Like,
was that the worst period of time? Maybe. I mean, definitely wasn't great.
Because that removed that tribe, just like they removed other tribes also.
That was when it got like really terrible.
Right. So the question is, what is that Avodah Zarah going to come back? What's going to happen? The Rambam says two things. He says the Mashiach comes to bring Korbanos, and the Rambam also says that Korbanos are only like some kind of antidote to Avodah Zarah. This is very, very hard to understand. I mean,
the first part of it.
Right. So what? How do you understand meaning? And the Rambam also says when Mashiach comes, people are going to understand, and everybody's going to keep mitzvahs, and it's going to. How does this work? How does any of this work? So it's interesting. There happens to be a machlokes. I think it's a machlokes Rambam Ramban. Not specifically to this, but this is Blumenthal's shita. Is that everybody agrees that in theory the mitzvahs are considerably more elevated than their practical application, right? I mean, the Rambam wrote an entirety of Mishnah Torah of halachas that were irrelevant in his lifetime, Either that he was hoping would become relevant, sure. But all of Torah is relevant. In fact, Chazal said this in a few places, that there are certain mitzvahs, like Ben Sarimar, lo haya v'lo nivra. Never happened. It's machlokes, but okay, never happened. So why is it in the Torah? Drush v'kal b'schar. If you learn it, you're going to gain from it. Meaning there's schar, there's reward. It doesn't just mean like cookies and alamah, but it means that there's gain. There's what to gain out of these mitzvahs. You will learn from it, you will gain from it, you will grow from it. This is important. Meaning whether or not it's practically applicable in this way or not. Everybody agrees that that's true. The question is it possible that at some point in time we will experience the mitzvahs in a different way to the way that we currently experience them, but also be practical? Meaning, is it possible to practically observe the mitzvahs, not as we know them today? Now, this is heretical, meaning until we have some understanding that that is the truth, it would be heretical to say so, because you can't reinvent tefillin based on your kavanas and kabbalah. Tefillin is tefillin. That's just the way that it is.
Isn't everything evolutionary to some degree
Mhm.
in Judaism? Meaning, the way I was thinking about it was like the way Jews were acting before the Torah was when they were 2, and now they're 15.
Yes.
When Mashiach comes, will be retired or something. It's the one person's life.
Yes.
30.
We are growing up.
But the Torah has always evolved. There was not a lot of people who wore different types of tefillin all day long. They only stood when they learned. They did all these different things. They didn't
So-
write it down and then they wrote
Although, but tefillin was tefillin, meaning it didn't change.
But there's different versions of it.
So the actual tefillin themselves has the same text. There's a question of what order the text goes in. It's Machlokes Rashi Rabbeinu Tam, which are both, and 2 other possible shittas. The Lubavitcher Rebbe in the stopped doing it, at least in public, but they found him in the first 2 years, after he came to America, that he wore 4 sets of tefillin. And he would cycle through 4 sets of tefillin. That's there's different shittas, and okay, all al pi Kabbalah, but meaning all of them are viable shittas within tefillin. But
the way with suicide, things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, those. So they're minhagim. They're all. But the mitzvah of tefillin. The question is, can you observe the mitzvah of tefillin without tefillin? Right. So can you observe korbanos without korbanos? That's an interesting question. Rav Kook has a fascinating shita where he says maybe at some point in time we will cease from bringing animal korbanos. They will all be meal offerings. And this, he says, is what we say at the end of Davening, that what will be sweet and pleasant to Hashem will be the mincha of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. They will cease from bringing animal korbanos. He says this, in the Siddur, al derech, a little bit al derech drush, maybe al derech pshat, but he deals with it lahalacha. You want a real? This is some renegade Torah right here. But he suggests, how will it be that we will? The Rambam says, pashtus, that we bring korbanos. He says, how are we gonna get away from the Rambam? The Rambam says we're gonna bring korbanos. So he says it might be that at a point in time where the world has evolved to the point that animals have intellect, that it would be immoral for us to kill them. We would feel that it would be immoral for us to kill animals because they would have, we spoke about this with the snake and with dinosaurs. Who knows what kind of intellectual capacities they might have had. But if animals were to be elevated to the point that they had some kind of human-like intellect that was recognizable, that it would feel immoral for us to kill animals, perhaps Chazal could be oker dover min haTorah b'sheiv va'al taisa. Meaning, we have certain mitzvahs in the Torah that the Chachamim said, even though this is a mitzvah daraisa, you're not going to observe it. For example, shofar on Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah. Torah says blow shofar. Chazal say, no, you don't. Lulav on the first day of Sukkot. Chazal, the Torah says, Chazal said, not on Shabbos. So Rav Kook says maybe we'll be able to be meaning the Chazal will be able to ki'ilu uproot a mitzvah by saying we have other reasons to say don't observe it. Meaning the mitzvah still fundamentally stands, but in an unobservable way. It's a big chiddush.
Carbon Pesach also.
Korban Pesach is a separate shot. That's a separate shot.
I wouldn't mind henshmura matzah.
Yeah.
Because, like $40 a pound. We can cut that out.
That's true.
Find an alternative.
It happens to be now's not the time for this.
Lamb's
But
Right? Wow.
But where does the Rambam discuss Korban Pesach? Where does the Rambam discuss Korban Pesach? No?
I'm gonna guess Hilchot Pesach.
So there are two places that the Rambam discusses.
You idiot.
So he has the halachas of Pesach. The Rambam has in two places. He has Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, and he has in Hilchos Karbanos. He has the halachas of Korban Pesach. But where does the Rambam discuss specifically the halachas of Korban Pesach? The answer is nowhere. Nowhere.
It's a different part of the TS
No.
of that night.
No. The Rambam never ever calls it Korban Pesach. He calls it Ha-Pesach. It is not a Korban. What's the difference between Korban Pesach and every other Korban?
Read it.
Eat the whole thing. Eat the whole thing. And at least in the...
There's several of the bones you can't break.
And you have to do it in one house. I mean, by Sechad Yachal, and you can't... There's 1,000 halachas.
I wanted to ask, is there any other meaning? Like, what is the literal definition from Korban? Could it have a dual meaning? That when Mashiach comes,
It has
Korban
many
will not
meanings.
be a slitting of the throat, but it'll be like an offering of a different.
They are the Arba. But remind me when we get closer to Vayikra, we'll talk more about Karbanos. There's a lot more to say. Well, how do we get onto all of these things? Because we were talking about Bereshis, I think. Tariq Mitzvahs, yeah. We didn't even get there yet, right? We didn't get there yet. It's the Sefer Yitzirah that we spoke about, whether or not you can create an animal that's parav. That's an interesting shaila.
Avram spoke and it was created.
Yeah.
Therefore, it wasn't shafted.
Yeah. There's not meat and milk, and what halachic ramifications that has to lab-grown meat, which might or might not be relevant. Probably not relevant because lab-grown meat is still grown from something, as opposed to what Avram said, which is not. But which is also an interesting question. But Basha says we started speaking a little bit about we're well off topic and behind schedule, but no, that's fine. We started speaking a little bit about in the world of creation. That how do we get into Tariq Mitzvahs? We want to talk about Lav and Garti.
You started out with Big Bang and then you went to.
And then somebody else something about mitzvahs. Okay, no,
How to keep them all.
yeah. So yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, whatever. So back to Bereshis for a second.
You asked, he asked a question.
We asked him pshat. Oh, you pshat. We asked him pshat
What
about
was your question?
pshat about mitzvahs. Pshat. Okay.
What? The same answer question when you opened up Rambam.
No, so we started speaking about pshat and mitzvahs. Good. Meaning pshat and mitzvahs. So pshat and Torah, meaning the original pshat of the psukim needed to be intelligible and understandable to the people that at least were originally reading it. And by Matan Torah, people knew what that was. According to the Ramban, most likely what Moshe Rabbeinu gave to the Jewish people as termed the Sefer HaBris after Matan Torah was from Bereshis until the end of Parshas Mishpatim. And then the rest of the Torah was revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu, or at least the general ideas that Ibn Asher says were given to Moshe Rabbeinu, all of them in Har Sinai. And then the specific rollout of the mitzvahs were given to Moshe Rabbeinu throughout the time of the Midbar from the Oil Moed. That's the Abravanel speaks about this extensively at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, and then was written down at the end of the 40 years in the desert, where they got the final version of the Torah Shemchav, as we know it today. But Pshat needed to be understandable to the people that were there, right? Pshat needed to be understandable. They probably had never seen dinosaurs. Maybe they had, maybe they hadn't. They did not understand quantum physics, certainly as we do today. Whether or not we understand quantum physics today is a separate question, right? And they didn't know from the Big Bang. They didn't know about redshift of galaxies moving at different speeds. They didn't know any of these things. Pshat and the Psukim needed to be intelligible and understandable. It happens to be the Medrash also says that Kvod Elokim Haster Davar, quoting the pasuk, that the first parak of Bereshis is Hester. It is to a certain extent unintelligible, and we accept that there are many, many secrets, as we've discussed, that we just don't understand whatsoever. But the second pasuk of Bereshis, the Ramban writes, this is where the Torah describes the Big Bang. Now, you're going to say to me, what do you mean the Torah describes the Big Bang? Pasuk says as follows: "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz," which Rashi tells us is not a sentence but a fragment of a sentence. There is no verb in that sentence. How do you translate Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz? No,
God, in God's creation.
the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth, semicolon. Right? Meaning there's no verb.
Headline.
According to Rashi, there is no verb in Pasuk Aleph. Right. At the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth, where's the first verb? Ve'aretz hayisat tova, meaning the first act. Ve'aretz hayisat tova, and the land was empty and void. Ve'chashech al pnei tam, and there was darkness above the deep. V'ruach Elokim merachafes al pnei hamayim, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the water, meaning this is all setting the stage to Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer Elokim yehi ar vayhi ar. At that point in time, God says there should be light, and there was light. Meaning the first act of creation is Vayomer Elokim yehi ar. That's the first act of creation. Meaning the rest is just setting the stage. Setting the stage for Vayomer Elokim yehi ar vayhi ar.
Plus Machshava Moros. That's one of the 10.
Yeah. So sort of. There are only 9 times that the Torah says Vayomer Elokim. So where's the Asar Ma'amaros? So the Gemara says, and Nachman Rezav spends a lot of time discussing this particular Gemara. Chazal tell us, Bereshis Maimer Soso. That the word Bereshis was a veiled word of creation, which works with this Rashi, right? Rashi saying that this is all a run-on fragment of a sentence. Is that there isn't like an act of creation, it's a setting, a stage of creation, it's Maimer Soso. It's that part of like the world that we just don't have any idea how to comprehend beforehand, meaning that the Big Bang begins in Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer Elokim yehi ar vayhi ar. There should be light, some kind of explosion of light. But the Ramban already points out that the setting of this stage in is in Pasuk Beis. Where is this setting of the stage in Pasuk Beis? It's a lot of Ramban here, but that's Chaim. Va'aretz hayisat tova vo, says the Ramban. Rabbi Machaya, no, that's annoying. Put it on different pages here. It doesn't have it. Hold on. We'll put it up here because that. Say what? I don't think so. No, they edited the Rashbam. They edited the. I'm not sure. Did they? Maybe. Oh yeah, parts of it. Oh, I'm not sure which parts they yeah.
I don't remember either, but there's sometimes we'll say this is very confusing, so we.
Right. Well, for the English, all the good stuff in the English, but I don't think they edited the Hebrew.
Well, it's massive.
I don't think they edited the Hebrew.
So they want to think.
Yeah.
Couldn't find it.
Bum. I mean, it just might be the top setting. Yeah, I've got the notes here. Give me 1 second.
Create earth and water. And that's like.
Yeah, so that's a machlokes. That's a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in Maseches Chagiga. The Gemara asks the question, what happened first? The Mishnah asks the question, what happened first? Shamayim Haaretz and machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But the Ramban writes. Yeah. Okay, it says Kfar Noida. You need to know that certainly the way that the Rishonim understood it, that the world is made out of 4 foundational kinds of matter. There's fire and water and earth and air, right? That was how, up until, I don't know, Copernicus, they figured out that there were more things there. But that was how everybody understood the world. And the truth is that those four things, you can divide the periodic table of elements into those four different elements anyway. And they behave fundamentally differently from each other. And certainly experientially, we experience these four elements as distinct elements. But the Ramban points out, that all four of these things, earth and fire and water and air, are all made of the same thing. Right? This is 800 plus years ago.
Matter.
Right? He says, Vehamud Shelah hu igol haaretz. Vehamayim mikifin al haaretz. And the pillar that everything rests on is the igul haaretz, the circle of the world, meaning no flat earthers in the days of the Ramban. That was a newfangled nonsense. Historically, nobody believed that the earth was flat. You know that, right? Like, nobody serious ever thought that the earth was flat. That's like only since like internet hoaxes that people thought that this was true. They didn't know how big it was, and they didn't know that there was land between Europe and India. That was what Columbus found. It's like, whoo,
I thought the
It's land.
Scandinavians thought that the earth was flat, like the Vikings. I thought
maybe
How do they know that the Earth was round?
because
You could see it on the horizon.
they were smart.
That's
Like,
not an answer. and
they-
that's not an answer
They
either.
realized that if you keep on walking, it gets further away, and also if you stand high enough, everything looks curved.
Yeah, but the flat earthers would say if you look high enough, that everything's still flat.
Yeah, they're dumb.
Okay,
I'm saying there is no science. There is no science supporting it, and in the ancient world, nobody ever believed it. In the Ramban, writes Mufurish, Igul Haaretz, the round world, right? It says Va'amayim mekiven al haaretz, and
It's flat.
water covers water covers planet Earth. Va'avrim makif al hamayim, and air surrounds the water. That's called the atmosphere. Now this is an interesting one. Va'ish makif al ha'avir, and fire surrounds the air. Now that's kind of true. It's kind of true. Everything that comes into the atmosphere burns up, meaning it ignites. What exactly the nature of fire is still a machlokes between scientists. We're not entirely sure, practically speaking, science, like what fire is, or certainly what we should call it, but fine. It says, Va'amar HaKasav ki ha'aretz lavsha tzura. Now, this is important terminology here. It says, Va'amar HaKasav, the Pasuk says, ki ha'aretz lavsha tzura, that the world took form, meaning it was formless, and then it began to take form. It says, V'haya ha'esh makif lemala al hamayim va'afar me'uravim. And the way that the earth rolled out was, first and foremost, he says you had fire, ha'esh makif lemala al hamayim va'afar me'uravim, where water and earth were all still combined together. Va'ruach min hasheves, and wind blew v'tikanis b'choshech, and blew into the darkness. Va'terachef al hamayim, and hovered above the water, meaning he's discussing some kind of evolution of elements into the world as we know it. He says v'yira'eli. Now this is the chiddush of the Ramban. He says v'yira'eli. It appears to me sha'hanekudah hazos, that this point, belavsha hatzura, when it took its first form, v'hayasa boihu, it became something. He says, He shachacham karin asa evan shasir. This is what the Gemara in Yuma discusses and refers to as the foundation rock of the world, the evan shasir. Shemimenu nishtasa olam. From there, the world expanded. Says the Ramban, the way to read the pasuk is Ve'ha'aretz, and all matter, Hayasa, was Tahu, meaningless.
Could it not be referring to the universe, but rather the planet Earth? You can, like, all that could be the planet Earth. Like,
It could be
all
talking about
those
planet Earth.
together look like Jupiter or something. And then
Could be.
all of a sudden-
It could absolutely be. But his point here, I mean, where he says where he says that it was tohu, and then bohu, meaning tohu vavohu. He says bohu means bohu, and then there was something that was tohu. There was meaningless nothing. Bohu, and then something. Meaning that there was then a something. Or something that we could recognize. He says this is what the Greeks refer to as hiuli, what we would call today helium, meaning the first element. First protons and neutrons and electrons that occurred. That was the hiuli, says the Ramban. That's what the Greeks refer to as the primordial substance of all existence, the first element of matter. That's called bohu. There's tohu, there's meaningless, nothing. All elements, everything there but meaningless, formless, shapeless, and then all of a sudden there's something. There's a something in that. Now, how you want to understand the Ramban in modern day science, whether he's talking about the universe or he's talking about planet Earth, which both of them could be accurate reads within the Ramban, it's hard to know based on what we know, what he knew. But what's very clear is that he's describing that there was definitely an evolution of elements from things that were formless to having greater form. And that it all begins with a single point, and that's what he refers to as the nikuda achas. That it begins with a something. That from there it all takes shape. Now what's interesting here is that he opens up an entire Pandora's box of saying, and this is what Chazal refer to as the Even Shasir. What is the Even Shasir?
That's where they have it now in Yerushalayim.
Right, that is Dome of the Rock. What's the rock? The Even Shasir, right? The rock that is on top, right? The rock that is Harabais, that Chazal say, Mimenu nishtas ha'olam, that the whole world expanded from there. Says the Ramban, that's not what it means, obviously. He's saying what Chazal are saying, and he doesn't explain this outright, but what he's saying is, this is what Chazal mean by Even Shasir, that there was a point from which the whole world expanded. And one can access that at this place. Meaning there is almost an access point, like a portal to the beginning of time in Yerushalayim, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, on Yom Kippur with the Kohen Gadol, that in that moment he experiences timelessness, the world before time. That's what he experiences. That's called Even Shasir, foundation rock. It's not like a rock. I mean, it might also be a rock, but it's not about the rock. It was never about the rock. It's about what that rock allows an experience of, which is primordial existence, which makes a tremendous amount of sense because the miracle that occurs in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is Aron Eina Min Hamida, that the Aron Kodesh takes up no space. How do you know the Aron Kodesh took up no space?
10 on each side and that's 20.
10 amas on each side, and it's a 20 amma room.
So where is it?
Right? And the pasuk says in Truma that it's amasayim v'chetzi rachboi, v'ama v'chetzi kamasai, v'ama v'chetzi. So how are you going to make a box that is 2.5 cubits long without it taking any space? No. Aron Eina Min Hamida, in that place, all matter and time and space is all, it's all there. It's all still wrapped up in that place, which is why that's also the place where tshuva is possible. It is back to primordial existence. It goes into a world of before sin, before, meaning before there was even a before.
Wormhole.
Right. It is going into that place of existence.
Space itself or because the Aron?
Both. Meaning, because the Rambam says when the Aron wasn't there, the Kohen Gadol would put the Keteros on the Even Shasir. The Aron was an expression of that reality. Because the Aron was also This is also kind of labeled. The Yerushalmi in Shkalim describes that the Aron was a tesseract. A tesseract.
From Marvel movies.
Correct. Meaning it was a multi-dimensional, at least a 4-dimensional object. The Machlokes, how many dimensions it had. What we know from the Bavli is that it was at least a multi-dimensional object in that it could be read legibly from both sides, right? Which is not physically possible, right? You can't. That's what I'm saying. The luchos. So, but the Yerushalmi says that not only could it be read from backwards and forwards, it could also be read from either side. Meaning, whichever side you looked at it, it looked as if it was engraved that way. And the Gemara says that the mem and the samach shebeluchos were floating in midair, right? So the luchos were carved all the way through. The mem and the samach, the middle parts that are not connected, were floating in midair, and you could read it legibly from one side to the other, which meant
First step, the broken.
correct, the broken luchos. They were a tesseract, right? That was a multi-dimensional object.
Material was it made out of, would you say?
Sapphire, right? Ke'evan sapphire.
Clothes were made out of sapphire.
Yes.
A lot of things are.
It's the Evan Sapphire. That's how the Psukim describe it. That Moshe Rabbeinu had to quarry it to himself to make the second set of luchos. But okay, Pasha says that the Ramban describes how the existence of the world begins with some kind of expansion of all things, and that expansion of all things leads to the existence of the first, I suppose, understandable part of creation that we have any access to is Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. And Hashem says, "Let there be light." Now, this is an interesting reality. The Kotzker points this out. The Medrash says the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos that the world was created by Asar Ma'amaros. Why is the world created by Asar Ma'amaros? No,
Spirit.
no, it's a Mishnah. Come on. Ba'asar Ma'amaros. Yeah, we should read this inside. Says the Mishnah, beginning of the 5th parak of Pirkei Avos, Ba'asar Ma'amaros Nivra Ha'elam, the world is created with 10 utterances. Ma Talmud Leimer, why? HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have created the world with just one thing. He could have said, Yehi world. There'd be a world. Right? Ella, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this? Lipara min harashayim, to be able to claim, to be able to exact punishment from the Rashayim. Shema'abdin esa'olam shenivra ba'asar ma'amaros, to be able to punish the wicked people that destroyed the world that was made through 10 utterances. V'litein schar taiv letzadikim, and to give reward to the tzadikim. Shemekayim esa'olam shenivra ba'asar ma'amaros, to give reward to the tzaddikim that created that have upheld the world that was created with 10 utterances. There's a lot of pieces to this Mishnah to try and understand, but Pasha says the Mishnah is telling you that because the world is created with 10 utterances, it gives the possibility of good and evil. Meaning, were it to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have said Yehi world, it would have been impossible to have tzaddikim and Rashayim.
If you did only 5 or 7.
So let's test it. Because there is a fascinating reality. If you take a look through the beginning of creation until the end. Let's go backwards. Human beings have what we refer to as bechira chavshis, freedom of choice, right? We are the only things in existence, at least to the best of our knowledge, that experience freedom of choice. What do we mean by freedom of choice? No?
The ability to make a decision.
Dogs make decisions too. Do they not? Conscious thought, maybe. It's good. Is to be able to say, and this is how we experience the freedom to choose, which, by the way, is not to get too off topic, but this is what AI does not have. We'll never have. We'll never have.
Even if they train it.
It's impossible because
The ability to lie or do something that is not directly beneficial to ourselves.
no.
No.
Altruism is possible. Animals have
No, the opposite.
no, the antithesis of altruism is also. I mean,
The ability to go against
what?
something that makes sense.
No,
Or what?
to go against yourself.
Self-preservation.
To feel internal conflict. We are the only thing in existence that feels internal conflict. Right? Dogs don't feel internal conflict.
I'm gonna ask,
Right? What? At least as far as we know.
Is it the paid
We have no we have no experience of. Now we have
$20 a month.
right $20 a month to find out.
That's copyright or higher.
There you go.
What would you call
We
it?
don't want that.
What would you
freebie
call it when you're
answer. We
training
want
a
the real
dog
answer from the paid one.
to sit?
Yes, and
They want the treat, but they know I can't go after the treat because then I won't get, the reward.
So
They tell themselves, no, stay. You can see the dog sort of suffering and waiting
Correct.
until you say, okay, now get it.
correct.
That's
That is
internal conflict.
no. That is deciding between what I want now and what I want later. Meaning
So modifying behavior.
you can have animals that are choosing between two things that they like, but you will never find an animal that knows that they should do the right thing. They know that they absolutely should do the right thing, and then chooses to do the wrong thing. Like it doesn't happen, right? What? Humans do. Human beings have this incredible capacity for evil, right? Animals don't have judgment calls on themselves or others. They don't feel regret or guilt. They can feel sad. They can feel pain. They can feel elation. But shame and guilt and regret, you don't find like an animal that has a midlife crisis, right? You don't find like a puppy that decides like, I'm done with rabbits and puppy. I'm going to find, some kids like, red Ferrari toy and find another puppy. Yeah, you don't find these things, right? Like animals don't go through existential crisis. Human beings do. But animals do experience emotions and feelings. We certainly do see that they have some level of choice to a certain extent, not nearly to the extent that we do. But I'll tell you a chiddush. This was fascinating. A couple of years back, it was like in the coming out of COVID stage where like you're desperate to look for like activities for your children. So we went to the Everglades and we went to the alligator tour. You know what I'm talking about, right? That's a fascinating thing, the alligator tour thing. Like this is the job that no Jewish boy would ever take ever. Never, ever, ever. It's the dude that like feeds the alligators. No, he's not like does the trick, puts his head in that. So he said, like, people are like, oh, isn't the alligator going to eat your head? Like, so he's like, nah, he's not going to do that. And like one kid was like, yeah, because like, you know him, like you've been training him for like 20 years. And he said, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If he wanted to, he would absolutely bite my head off right now. You know why he's not biting my head off right now? Because I fed him. Not because I fed him, because he ate. But if he was not fed, said reptiles, these guys, not trainable. You can't train them. You can't train an alligator. Amazing. You can't train an alligator. You can't train a fish. Right? Is that
Dolphin, well, it's mammal. but-
yeah, I'm saying. So this is interesting. Is human beings are like trainable to the extent that we can adulterate our own nature. Dogs can be trained to do things that are against their nature, right? In the wild, you don't find fat animals. Human beings can adopt animals and make them fat and unhealthy. I saw an article that was written that this is a chiddush. The millennials now are not having children as much. They are adopting pets. And the article was, it's not working out well for the pets. Right?
It's working out well for Chewy, right?
I feel like if humans lived in the wild, we wouldn't be fat either.
It's true. It's true. But Pashtus is that like all the doggy pampering and all that, it's not working out well for the pets. This is not Labor Day for them. They're not having such a great time. But that notwithstanding, and this is chashuv to understand, in the wild you don't find animals that go against their nature. They live with their nature. So the systems that are even earlier than that, trees, like it would even be ludicrous to try to train them against their nature. The nature of a tree is to do what that tree does. And the chayk hateva of earth and water, of land and sea, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu breaks at Kriyas Yamsuf, right? And you see that the land and the sea are having like a big hack about this whole thing. Whether this is fair and can HaKadosh Baruch Hu demand this of us. That's a Saru Shel Yam that is demanding retribution for violating the laws of nature by the sea having to make room for dry land. The earlier you go in creation, the less adulteratable the thing is. The last thing that Hashem creates is mankind. We are the most adulteratable of all created things. Versus the first thing that Hashem creates, which is light, which is the universal constant. It is the most unbreakable of the laws of nature. Which is what Rashi says at the beginning of Bereshis. Bereshis, bara Elokim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, b'midas hadin. Now, most of the time people read this and they go, ooh, b'midas hadin means, like on Rosh Hashanah, there's din, there's judgment. That's not what midas hadin means. Midas hadin means the natural world with law and order. Midas hadin means the laws of nature. This is why the Shlomo Kodesh already points out that Elokim is the same gematria as Hateva, the nature. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world with rules. And the greatest rule in all of the universe is the speed of light. That is the most unbreakable of the rules of the world. That is the beginning of creation, yeah.
So the pasuk before Vayior is talking about how there's earth and water.
No, that's setting the stage.
What does that mean?
Meaning,
It says
at the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth and the earth, and Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or.
So Vayior came before all that? It was just like...
Yes.
Yeah, that's just an narration.
Okay.
Meaning, that is the preamble. That's how Rashi reads it.
Right.
Meaning, there's meaning to all of those things, but the first thing at the very least that we can understand, whatever happened before Vayihi Or, we don't know.
Right, so Vayior temporally came first.
Right. At least for us. Meaning maybe the stuff before that was preamble to that.
So when it talks about like God's spirit hovering over the water, like that happened after Vayior, you're saying?
Probably, yeah. At least the way that Rashi learns it, yes.
Okay.
Meaning that is the preamble to Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or.
But it talks about darkness. Like
Yes.
The deep
Yes.
darkness. But like it makes sense to talk about the darkness that existed before Vayior, and all of a sudden you're saying that the darkness existed after Vayior.
Yeah, although the pasuk then says V'lachoshech kara laila.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now,
it's-
how you want to understand those psukim in terms of quantum physics? I have theories. We could talk about it. What exactly that means. We spoke about matter and antimatter. I mean, it happens to be this is a fascinating shit of the Gra. You want something really wild? This is very cool. We spoke about this a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that science today has not a great idea how matter exists at all, because at the Big Bang, matter and antimatter should all have canceled each other out, right? So the way that scientists think probably happened is that there's like some reason, like some off-balance reason that matter won out against antimatter, right? Like nobody knows entirely why, but the Gra says something phenomenal. It says that at the beginning of creation, there's Or and there's Choshech, and the Or is Gover on the Choshech. Means that when you have a candle in a dark room, the light of the candle illuminates the whole room, right? Meaning we see this like light winning over darkness. He says there was only one time in history that wasn't true. Malchus Choshech, when the darkness overwhelmed the light, meaning from a quantum physics perspective, that antimatter won over matter. Meaning, when you lit a candle, it was a light, but there was no light coming from it. So the light was being swallowed by the darkness, swallowed the light.
Is that why that was the last?
Before Marcus Becharis, yeah.
No, also because the first.
Yes.
Light and last, because it's the hardest, like you said, for me to break that nature.
Yes.
So that's why.
Yes.
So
Marcus Becharis is meaning because the Chidush Harim, right? We spoke about this once before. The Chidush Harim explains. I think it's based in the Zohar, but he explains this and expands upon this a lot. That the 10 Makkos were an undoing of the 10 Mamaros. The first of the Mamaros was Bereshis Bara Elokim, which the end of that is Marcus Becharis, right? That's Bechara to the beginning. But right after that is Vayom Elokim Hi'ar, and before that was Chashech, right? That's the cancelling of Vayi'ar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu unmade the world in the 10 plagues, and then he rebuilt the world with the Asar Sadibros. That was Matan Torah, meaning Hashem creates the world with 10 utterances, destroys it with 10 Makos, and rebuilds it with 10 Dibros. Which there's a lot more to say about that, but yeah.
Likes the number 10.
Right. Well, 10 is spheres from Kesser until Malchus. So that's the beginning of the pasuk
another
piece.
question.
Yeah.
From a Kabbalistic perspective, with the Tzimtzum happening and then the Tav coming in, and that's why
Maybe.
or
Maybe that all happened before.
maybe this all happened before.
Right.
Okay, so that's just confusing. But then, like the earth and water being created didn't happen until after that.
Yes.
Okay.
Meaning all of these things of Tzav and the Kavan Tzimtzum. So at least the Kabbalah that I have from Arabim is that both the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov agree that Tzimtzum is in a kipshuta. It's not literal.
What is Tzimtzum?
Tzimtzum is Hashem's constriction.
Creating space.
Um,
is just
Whether or not this was what the Nefesh Chaim wrote, it's a long discussion off on that. But that Tzimtzum is any kipshuta. The Arizal described about Tzimtzum, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence being constricted to make room for the world as we know it, is not literal. It is true, but it's not what the words say.
Are you talking about the thing where they said that there was like an infinite amount of people that fit in the Beit HaMikdash?
No. I'm talking about how could it be that the whole world is created, meaning that Hashem is everything and everywhere and all space and time, all of existence, all at the same time, and then a world exists. So this is the question that Mekubalim asks.
nothing
how could it be?
exists where God exists. It just gets consumed by God.
Otherwise, he's everything God,
Yeah.
which is
You
not.
the only reason you exist
Sorry,
is because
Jerusalem.
God's constricting himself from you so that you can exist.
We can talk about this question, Tzimtzum and Kavan,
That's
what
fine.
this thing, in great detail, but not for now.
It's just when it comes to creation, the stuff like is
Yes.
very important, and just from my understanding, right?
Yes.
It plays. I just want one version of the truth of how the world is.
So the answer to that question, the answer to that question.
Damn it, I'm gonna try.
No, so yeah, you need to know that the answer to that question of like I just want one version, you're not going to get, and I'll tell you why, is because all of them are true on different levels. Meaning there is
I want
a-
70 versions of the creation.
Me too.
That's one version.
So yeah,
You were saying it had to be 10 statements that included
Yes.
and not one, because if it was one, then there would be no possibility to choose. I miss.
so let's explain that. Is this? Thank you for
Bring this back.
the point is this, and this is essential to understand, is that with every subsequent stage of creation, this is what the Kotzker points out, with every subsequent stage of creation, God's presence is further hidden. Meaning that light can never adulterate the will of God. Light always observes the will of God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created light and programmed it, typed in the code, this is the speed of light. That's it. This is what light does. It can never break those rules. That's it. We refer to this in Kiddush Levana when we talk about the sun and the moon. Chok uzman nasan lahem shelo yishanu is tafkidam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them rules. They don't break those rules. They keep to their rules. They do exactly what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants them to do. They don't break the rules. All of a sudden, you have like day 5, day 6 of creation, that it becomes possible. Animals which were created in the morning of day 6, it's possible to like mess with their nature a little bit. And by human beings, it is possible for a human being to deny the existence of God. Meaning, by the time human beings are created, God has been hidden 10 times, which means that it is possible for us to choose to see God or to not see God. We are the only thing in existence that has that choice. The goal of creation being for us to make the correct choice. That's what the Mishnah said. The purpose of creation is for us to get to the point where we're like, ooh, we know what all of these things are, and this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to do. Light does not have that choice. Light doesn't even perceive itself as having a choice whatsoever. Doesn't have an identity.
Don't people train birds?
Yes.
And they were created at the same time as fish that are less trainable. So.
Maybe. You can ask kashas in pieces of it. Yeah, you can absolutely ask kashas in it.
Because this seems logical. What is the purpose? What is the message in this?
Of what?
If you just think of the universe as a terrarium, and we are the lizards in the terrarium, of course, everything else in the terrarium is a fabricated thing set up just for the lizard that's in there. The lizard can do whatever he wants, but really the owner moves around the plants. I put in the food. Everything comes from outside. None of that stuff can move around except for the lizard. So what is the message to take away from this? Because it seems kind of logical that if the world was created for us, then logic would dictate that, yes, everything is created for us, like a tool for us to use, and we have the free will to either use it one way or use it whatever.
Correct. That's exactly, and that is exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Adam HaRishon. Urudu bidgas hayam va'of hashamayim. You're supposed to rule over everything in existence. Meaning, we are supposed to, somehow or another, and the way the Al-Shach says, which is very beautiful, is give meaning to everything in existence. Meaning, we are going to justify the existence of all creation. That was before the Chet. After the Chet, we get downgraded to eating from that which we grow.
Also, isn't there, if we're 10 removed and we're blind, like we should be encouraged to spend time with the things that are not blind.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the point is that we are supposed to study them and learn from them. Shlomo Melech, the Chazal say, Shlomo Melech said, if not for the fact that the Torah taught us this halacha, I could have learned it from this animal. And meaning, because
I was thinking, when you said rule over them, I'm sure there's always different ways to use, but like the word rule, instead of thinking of, ruling over them.
Correct.
Ruling over them in the sense of understanding their
100%.
mechanisms and different.
So, to justify their existence by this being a representation of the will of God in the world, by understanding how this reflects Malchus Shamayim, which is essential, right? That's Urudu Bidgas Hayam. The way the Al-Shach says that Urudu means to bring down the justification for this creation. Meaning the will of God for this thing to exist comes down through me. That's Urudu Bidgas Hayam, which is, right? And then when we failed, then all of that kind of changed. But the point is that were it to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world with 11 utterances, then it would have been impossible to find God ever. And were it to be with 9 utterances, then we wouldn't have the choice to ignore him. This is the sweet spot of it is possible to see God or to not, which means that there is Bechir Chashis. We have the capacity to see Hashem or to ignore Hashem. We live in that sweet spot. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, is for this to exist.
Is there noticeable, because it's easy to tell between 9 and 10, and even 8 and 9, but it seems like before 8, there's really no significant difference in the...
Yeah, so it's a good question. You found something interesting, like the Gemara discuss conversations with like the sarim of different elements, right? The sar of the water, the sun, and the moon having conversations. I mean, there is, but light and darkness never have conversations. It's interesting. There's no conversations that light and darkness
Well, if you
have.
believe
They're
that
one.
darkness is just the absence of light.
Maybe. But
There's no
light,
one for light to talk to. Its
Right.
light is just talking to its shadow.
right? But light doesn't talk to anything. Meaning, there's no Sarah of light. There's no Malach of light. It's interesting because Chazal also point out that the angels were only created on day 2. It's only when there's a split that there's some level of duality that they are malachim. There's a lot more to say about that piece, but yeah, Chazal do see the anthropomorphizing of different elements of creation and having different conversations. Meaning Chazal do understand that there is this tussle that is going on even at higher levels of existence. We experience it with, training your dog or your parakeet, right? Like you can train a thing, but you can't train like the ocean, right? Like the nature of water is what it is. You can't change it. That's something that is unadulteratable. You can't finagle with it. It's like you can't fudge it and mess it up and turn it into other things. Like you can't. It is what it is. Yeah.
No.
Like so. That's the Asar Ma'amaros that Hashem creates the world, and what happens before that between Bereshis and Riyam Elokim Yiyar is a good question. What the Ramban is pointing out is that there was a point where all things existed, and then from there it expands, and that moment of time before time is experienced once again every year in the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Beis Hamikdash. That's where it is, like Evan Shasir, foundation rock. That is where all things tie into.
Where is the Ramban? Like, does he give sources for like how he comes up with like that idea?
So the Ramban writes on that V'yiraili, it appears to me. So he quoted as his own chiddush, although the Arizal said that the Ramban was the Mekubal HaMushlam. He was the only person that had the entirety of the Kabbalah of Kabbalah, meaning from the time of the Ramban to the Arizal.
If he was talking about the Big Bang, why is it yearly? It's a very earthly concept.
What do you mean? What's what yearly?
It circles the sun every year, right? So it's like 365 days. So if it's every year on Yom Kippur, that's not universal.
That's not a constant. It's only 365 in this million
Yeah,
years that we
it's,
exist.
it's the one day of year.
Like 1 billion years ago, it wasn't 365.
So you ask a good question.
Why
The
not
answer
once a week? Why not
and the answer
once a
and
day?
the answer is that it's not just it's the confluence of place and space and time, meaning everything in this in existence. This is the foundation of the Sefer Yetzirah, is Olam Shana and Nefesh. The world as we experience it is only experienced with space, time, and people. Right? And there is a confluence of those three things, meaning there's no such thing as me experiencing something outside of time or outside of place. And there's no such thing as place and time without a person to experience it. Meaning, it's a meaningless thing. It might exist, might not, but it's irrelevant. Right? That's whether,
We
right?
don't even know.
Quantum reality, like does something exist if you're not looking at it? Good. If nobody is observing it, does it exist? That's a good shot. But practically speaking, the Torah is discussing not where that place is, but how to recreate that emotional religious experience. Meaning how to access that which is antithetical to the world of sin and failure and shame and making the wrong decisions. It's rolling back to the place of the origination of all things, which, by the way, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva are also, Avnei Nezer writes, also correspond to the 10 utterances of creation of the world, where, and we say this on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is Hayom Haras Olam. Today is the birthday of the world. What do you mean the birthday of the world? That's when Adam HaRishon is created. Right? That is Naseh Adam. And by Yom Kippur, you get back to Bereshis Bara Elokim Es Hashemayim Es Haaretz. That's all the way back to the world of Tov Vavo, where all things meld into one thing. Which the Medrash Rabbah points out that Yom Echad, first Medrash Rabbah, Vayer Vayivoker Yom Echad Zu Yom Kippurim. Yom Echad is Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, you can experience Yom Echad. the day where there was only one thing, the unity of all things, which is there. That you can experience in Yom Kippur. That's the moment. Now, it happens. Well, it doesn't happen every 365 days. It happens roughly every 354 days, or if it's a leap year, another 29 days there, right? Meaning it happens because the Jewish people declared that it's Rosh Chodesh, and now it's Tishrei, and now we have done the avoda to get to that point, which is also why the Gemara says, this is the Mishnah at the beginning of Maseches Yoma, that the Kohen Gadol has to begin separating 7 days before Yom Kippur, right? Because he has to roll back the 7 days of creation before he can get back there, right? Meaning the whole experience is getting back to that point, and the point of it is to be able to say, these are all the things that I did because I'm creation number 10, which means that I had choices to make and I made the wrong ones. And if I would roll back to the beginning of all things and see the purpose of my life and the world and existence and why there is instead of there isn't, so then I would realize that I shouldn't have been an idiot. Right? Meaning the goal of it is to exit that place as a new creation that is willing to do the things that it takes to be the person we need to be. Which is ultimately how the Torah wants us to read it. It's not just the story of like, this is how God created the world. This is what Chazal are putting into the Torah. The meaning of the story is now I have an obligation as a intellectually honest, curious, critical thinker that understands that I am a created entity. Well, the way that Rabbeinu Nissim writes in the Hagdama of the Shas, says that a person needs to understand that they are a nivra, that they're just a created entity. Like I didn't make myself. I am a creation. This is what the Rambam points out in the name Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to himself as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So the Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim, what does Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh means? Literally, it means I will be. Asher, that, or because I will be. Right? Says the Rambam, everything else in existence is Ehyeh, I will be, Asher Yiyeh, depending on what else happens. It's a contingent existence. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the only non-contingent existence. This is the Rambam in the beginning of Yisod HaTorah, that there is something that requires nothing else. It's a non-contingent existence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, even if there isn't anything else, but nothing else exists without HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's, the whole world is, Asher Yiyeh. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. Depends on what happens. I exist. I believe I exist. That's true. Just for now. That's what we call in halacha chazaka. Status quo. Status quo. You're going to go home tonight? How do you know your house is there? You left it there, right? Meaning you're assuming that it is. It's a good assumption. That's a chazaka. Do you know that it's there? Right, I'm saying you don't know that it's there, but you're going to live your life as if it is, right?
Depending on my graphic settings is depending on how close I am.
Correct. Right. So it depends on how many hertz it's refreshing, right? That's exactly. That's a shalom bias issue. We can talk about it offline. The point is that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need anything, right? He is. That's what there is. That's Sherry. That's what the Rambam says. Yeah, and we need to understand that we're a created entity, and that is the purpose of understanding that all of these things have rolled out from there. And when you look at creation, you understand that, like, whoa, I'm the only thing that can mess myself up. I mean, not like harm myself. Animals can do stupid things and harm themselves and kill other animals, but to feel that I'm doing something antithetical to me. That I'm adulterating my nature, that I have the capacity for evil. Like a hungry tiger is not evil, he's hungry. Right? He's hungry. Chimpanzees, by the way, and they've done the research, chimpanzees do go on raids and kill and take pleasure in that. But from an evolutionary biological purpose, they don't feel bad about that. They feel great about that. They don't feel regret. They feel like this is good. Right? So this is exactly what I should do. I should find that other chimpanzee that is threatening my land and resources and my reproduction capacity and take glee in ripping its head off. That is, from an evolutionary biological standpoint, very good for the survival of chimpanzees. Human beings can do it even if it is not good for us, right? People can do things that are terrible, but it also means that human beings can do things that are wonderful, totally altruistic, like amazing innovation and creativity that nothing else has. Because we have the freedom to choose, because we don't have a glut programming that we have to observe. And that's the bria of humanity from the level of pshat. That's pshat, right? When you read it, that's what Hashem is telling us in the words. There wasn't anything, and then there was something, and then look around the world. You're in the world. You see these things. There's light. How's light going? Light is chazak. You can't do anything with it. That's what it is. It is what it is. What about you? You can mess yourself up. That's the story. Yeah.
It's funny. Sacrifice is another thing that animals cannot do.
That's true.
Even if a mother is being attacked and her baby's nearby, she'll run away and leave the baby in every case. So my question is korbanot really just sacrifice? And when Mashiach comes and we don't kill animals, could we just be sacrificing something in a way?
Maybe. I didn't say we're not going to kill animals. We probably are.
You
probably
promised it. You told all of us.
We probably are. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. With skirt of priests and throats of goats. Listening to Oriental nasal music. Wading knee-high in blood. That's also kind of Labor Day.
The Samaritans today still do korban pesach.
Yeah, but they're weird.
Don't forget about the ram race.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Huge
Yeah.
event.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. That's Kiddush Club on steroids, that, right?
One person died.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot to speak about that. But Chevra, there's a lot more to talk about, but we should have a marriage.
Ah, yeah.